All right, thank you all so much for joining us here today. My name is Melanie Zaber, and I'm a senior economist and the co-director of RAND's Middle Class Pathway Center, coming to you live from Pittsburgh, not too far from West Virginia. I'm here today with my colleague Marwa Al-Fakhri, who is an associate economist at RAND, and we are excited to share some preliminary findings from our work on apprenticeship in West Virginia. We will be recording today's webinar, so you're welcome to share with colleagues, come back to your favorite findings. Please feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A, and we'll save some time at the end to answer them. If you're not familiar with RAND, RAND is a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy research organization. RAND's mission is to improve policy and decision-making through research and analysis, like what you'll see presented today. RAND does research on a really wide range of topics. Today's research falls within our Education, Employment, and Infrastructure division, which is home to 200 researchers doing research on topics such as K-16 education, workforce preparation, and economic mobility. RAND recently launched the Rural America Partnership, which is focused on the critical issues facing rural communities. In collaboration with West Virginia University, this first year's projects focus on workforce development issues in West Virginia. The research will eventually grow to reflect the diversity of topics that RAND focuses on, and future projects may include early childhood reading, K-12 STEM education, substance and opioid use disorder, and mental and emotional health. Findings from this year's high school career and technical education project will be released in a public-facing report shortly before Thanksgiving, and you'll hear more about our apprenticeship work today. So why focus on workforce development? Workforce is a critical issue for any state looking to attract businesses to its borders, and people are an essential ingredient to workforce. Like the rest of the country, West Virginia faces an aging population, which limits the number of workers who are of age to be expected to work. The state has also been struggling with population loss, driven partly by outmigration, but mostly by what we'd call natural population loss, having more deaths than births, again, due to that older age gradient in the state. West Virginia also recently made headlines for having lost jobs in several of its historically strong sectors, including natural resources and mining and the hospitality sector. Compounding these challenges, West Virginia has the nation's lowest labor force participation rate, which is the share of working age individuals, 16 and older, who are working or actively looking for a job. West Virginia has consistently lagged about 10 percentage points behind the national average in its labor force participation rate, and that is still true today. One pathway into economically sustainable jobs and into the workforce is post-secondary education. West Virginia has a lower rate of college degree attainment than most states, amidst a national climate of growing skepticism about the returns on a college education. And so this points to apprenticeship as a potential alternative pathway. Why is apprenticeship such an attractive solution? It allows workers to quickly join the workforce during their apprenticeship, because apprentices work on active job sites as part of their training. That's part of the work-based learning that they go through. Apprentices also earn an income while learning because their work on job sites is compensated. Moreover, apprenticeship typically does not involve borrowing funds to pay for education. Training costs are usually paid for through federal grants. Because apprentices are connected to local employment through their job sites, apprenticeship pathways can also help prevent brain drain for states and communities, help states retain their population. Apprentices know that there is a job for them here because they already know that employer. Finally, community and technical colleges can be an essential stakeholder in apprenticeship as either apprenticeship sponsors themselves or as providers of the required technical instruction. And this aligns with West Virginia's strategy in centering work-based learning in its workforce development approach. To give you a brief preview of our findings, we're going to talk through how West Virginia is one of the top states in apprenticeship utilization in terms of how many apprentices relative to the working age population. We'll present findings that show that apprenticeship is growing in West Virginia and that that's driven by both the emergence of new programs as well as growth in the number of apprentices in existing programs. We'll highlight some key industries for apprenticeship in West Virginia, which include healthcare and social assistance, public administration, and construction. And then at the end, we'll discuss several opportunities to expand and improve apprenticeship, including aligning apprenticeship with the state's projected employment growth and strengthening existing apprenticeship infrastructure. I'm going to turn it over to Marwa to take you through our findings.
Thanks, Melanie. And thank you all for making the time to join us today. If you'd like, please share your name and where you're from, where you work in the chat. But before we dive into our findings, I would like to briefly tell you a little bit about our approach in studying apprenticeship in West Virginia. First, I should note that we focused exclusively on registered apprenticeship programs in the state, meaning programs that are registered with the U.S. Department of Labor and as such provide a nationally recognized credential to apprentices at the end of the program. So throughout today's presentation and discussion, if Melanie and I mention apprenticeship, we're always referring to registered apprenticeship. Now, to study registered apprenticeship programs, we use data from the Registered Apprenticeship Partners Information Database System, also known as RAPIDS. RAPIDS is an administrative database that collects data on registered apprenticeship programs and individual apprentices nationwide. And while RAPIDS provides comprehensive coverage of registered apprentices and is updated frequently, it also comes with its own limitation. For example, there's inconsistent use of occupational titles. We see industries of apprentices tagged by the industry of the sponsor, which sometimes doesn't always match eventual industry of employment. For example, an electrician training at a community college as the apprenticeship sponsor may show up as training in the educational services industry rather than construction. Also, some of the information collected in RAPIDS lacks detail. For example, age of the apprentice is reported in broad categories, 24 or under, 25 to 54, and 55 and older, which limits our ability to conduct more detailed analyses. I think these are all important limitations to keep in mind as we go through our analyses today, and we'll offer some caveat as well as we go. Our main analyses focus on trends in West Virginia over time. To contextualize some of the findings, we compare West Virginia both to the U.S. overall and to a group of peer states that we construct based on similarity to West Virginia's population demographics and labor market conditions. This peer group consists of Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, Ohio, and Tennessee. In some analyses, in addition to data from RAPIDS, we also use data from the American Community Survey, occupational employment and wage statistics, and employment projections. You will find the data source for all of the findings in the presentation on the blue ribbon at the bottom of the slide. We also supplemented our analyses with key informant interviews with apprenticeship stakeholders and leaders in the state. This work is ongoing, so if you'd like to share some insights with us from your experience working on apprenticeship in West Virginia, please feel free to reach out to us. Our email addresses will be at the end of the presentation, and Melanie, if you can, please drop our email addresses in the chat. Okay, now that we've talked through approach and data, I'm going to tell you a little bit about findings. First, let's look at how West Virginia stacks up nationally when it comes to apprenticeship utilization. We measure apprenticeship utilization as the number of active registered apprentices per 10,000 residents aged 15 to 64. We find that West Virginia leads most states in apprenticeship utilization. As you can see in this figure, in fiscal year 2023, West Virginia had about 57 apprentices per 10,000 residents. This is the 5th highest in the country. And West Virginia's utilization rate is notably higher, almost double of that of the U.S. overall. In 2023, the U.S. had about 29 apprentices per 10,000 individuals. West Virginia's utilization rate is notably outpaces that of similar states with comparable economies and workforce policies. That's the group of peer states that I mentioned earlier. Throughout this time period between 2014 and 2023. These trends in apprenticeship utilizations tell us two things. First, apprenticeship is already a well-established part of the workforce development strategy in the state of West Virginia. And two, it suggests that employers and workers in the state are starting to see the real value from the apprenticeship model. Next, we're going to zoom in on West Virginia and look at trends in apprenticeship participation over time. The number of active registered apprentices has increased by 67% since 2014. It grew from about 3,900 in fiscal year 2014 to about 6,400 in fiscal year 2023. We see substantial growth between 2014 and 2015. For example, one of the programs launched in that time period is the West Virginia Transportation Worker Apprenticeship Program, which officially launched January 1st of 2015. Another notable uptick in apprenticeship participation in the state is after the COVID-19 pandemic. And some of that is attributed to the apprenticeship state expansion grant that took place around that time period. Now, I want to offer a caveat here, as I promised I will offer caveats throughout. This may very well be an underestimate of the number of registered apprentices in the state. Some apprenticeship programs are national and hence are not necessarily registered with their location as West Virginia. And so for consistency, we only focused on programs that are registered as operating in West Virginia. This may leave out some programs that may be headquartered somewhere else, but offer apprenticeship programs for West Virginians. Now, over the same time period of apprenticeship expansion and growth, we also see the number of registered apprenticeship programs decline from 266 in fiscal year 2014 to about 127 programs in fiscal year 2023. As a result of these two trends, rising number of apprentices and fewer registered programs, we see an increase in the average size of the registered apprenticeship program. In 2014, registered apprenticeship programs had on average about 14 active apprentices. By 2023, the average program in West Virginia had about 50 apprentices. Some of this trend can be attributed to deliberate consolidation efforts that took place in the state, where smaller programs were consolidated into bigger programs, making more resources available for apprentices. And both the level and the change in average program size are distinct to West Virginia. During the same time period between 2014 and 2023, the average apprenticeship program in the United States ranged between 25 and 32 apprentices in size, and it has remained fairly stable since 2017, and notably smaller than the average size of programs in West Virginia. Next, let's look at where these apprentices are working, what kinds of occupations they are training for. Looking at both the industry and occupational breakdown gives us insights into what's driving the increase in apprenticeship utilization in the state and where growth opportunities might lie. In 2023, the three largest industries for apprenticeship in West Virginia, measured by the number of active apprentices, were healthcare and social assistance, public administration, and construction. Together, these three sectors accounted for about 85% of active apprentices in the state. Of course, knowing which industries have the most apprentices only tells part of the story. To really understand the landscape, we need to look at specific occupations within these industries. In healthcare and social assistance, about 81% of apprentices were trained to be childcare development specialists, making this occupation by far the largest within this industry in terms of the number of active apprentices. In public administration, about 73% of active apprentices are preparing to be municipal maintenance technicians. And in construction, carpenters, electricians, and pipe fitters make up about a little over half of apprentices in construction programs in the state. Now that we've seen which industries and occupations dominate apprenticeship in West Virginia, today the next natural question becomes, has it always been this way, or have we seen disproportionate growth in some industries and not others? To understand how the mix of industries has shifted over time and what it can reveal about the state's economy, workforce needs, and industries, we are going to look at change in the industry mix between the period of 2014 to 2023. To start, let's look at 2023 again. As I mentioned earlier, the largest industry is healthcare and social assistance, and 32% of active apprentices in the state were training in this industry. And that's denoted in blue on this figure. 26% of active apprentices in 2023 were in, 26 apprentices of active apprentices in the state were training in construction, and that's denoted on in orange on the figure. And 28% of active apprentices in the state were training in public administration, and that's gray in the figure. The rest of the apprentices in 2023 in the state of West Virginia were training in other industries. Now let's see how this industry mix changed over time. We see a remarkable growth in healthcare and social assistance industry, and at the same time, a decline in the relative proportion of construction. And it's important to note that the industry mix in West Virginia looks different than the rest of the US. In the US overall, construction accounts for a larger share of active apprentices, about 41%. And while healthcare is notably much, much smaller, just about 4%. These different patterns in industry mix between West Virginia and the US can be driven by two reasons, or one of two reasons. One is the relative size of these employment industries in the local economy in West Virginia relative to the US overall. So it is possible that we see a lot more in healthcare and social assistance because there is a bigger local labor market in healthcare and social assistance in West Virginia relative to the US overall. The second reason could be that different apprenticeship utilization rates by industry in West Virginia drive this different mix of industries and apprenticeship relative to the US overall. To understand which of these two reasons is contributing to the industry mix in West Virginia, we look at apprenticeship utilization rates by industry in the state. Here we measure industry utilization rate by the number of apprentices per 1,000 individuals employed in the industry. We can see that utilization rate in West Virginia is notably higher than that of the US in the three largest industries in the state, and especially in healthcare and social assistance, where West Virginia had about 15 apprentices per 1,000 workers in the industry, whereas the US overall had only 1 per 1,000 workers in the industry. And I want to caveat that we looked at industry employment overall. We did not restrict to only occupations that are apprenticeable in healthcare and social assistance. So it's very possible that this is an underestimate of the industry utilization rate when we're looking specifically at apprenticeable occupations. And while expanding apprenticeship opportunities is important in meeting workforce needs, it is also important to ensure that apprentices who start an apprenticeship program have the supports necessary to complete them, and they are well equipped to join the workforce. To see whether there are any completion challenges in the state in West Virginia, and if they exist, where, we examine apprenticeship completion rates in West Virginia. We find that in fiscal year 2023, 63% of apprentices complete their apprenticeship program upon exiting, meaning that roughly 2 out of every 5 apprentices who exit an apprenticeship program do not actually complete the program. And West Virginia's completion rate outpaces that of peer states and the US overall. But the question that becomes, is this completion rate at a good level, or is there room for improvement? To answer this question, I want to offer a comparison. 65% of students finished their bachelor's degree at West Virginia University within 6 years of entry. Now, given that apprenticeship offers a paid, debt-free path with hands-on work experience, one might expect reasonably that completion rates exceed those of traditional 4-year degrees. Now, this gap between expectation and reality signals that there may be completion challenges in the state and significant room for improvement. And where do we see room for improvement? We look at completion rates by industry in West Virginia and compare that to completion rates by industry in peer states and the US overall. We see that healthcare and social assistance has a remarkably high completion rates at 89%, which is driving up the state's overall completion rate. We think that differences in healthcare completion rates between West Virginia and the US and peer states is attributable to different occupational composition in the apprenticeship industry. We also see that completion rates are somewhat lower in West Virginia relative to the US and peers. This can be because of transportation difficulties in the state. Construction apprenticeship often require apprentices to commute between different work sites, and the rural nature and topography of the state makes it difficult getting around, or at least more time intensive. Now, in expanding apprenticeship to meet growing labor market needs, we should ensure that no group or population in the state is untapped or underreached talent that could be trained to address labor force shortages. To get an idea if there are unreached groups, we look at demographic composition of apprentices in West Virginia relative to the overall population of the state and see if there are any gaps in which groups can be underrepresented. First, we compare the demographic characteristic of registered apprentices to the demographic characteristics of the general working population in the state, meaning those who are 16 to 64 years of age. We also compared apprentices to West Virginians in the labor force, those who are either employed or looking for work. In this figure, we see that the proportion of veterans, females, white non-Hispanics, Black non-Hispanic, and Hispanic are roughly comparable among apprentices, those of working age, and individuals in the labor force in the state. Apprentices match the overall demographic composition of the state. And I should mention that those are not the only characteristics that ideally you want to see represented in the apprenticeship system, but we are limited in the socioeconomic and demographic characteristics that are collected and reported in Rapids. It's important to highlight that West Virginia has far higher female representation among active apprentices relative to everywhere else in the US. In 2023, 37% of active apprentices in the states were female. And this is remarkably higher than the US average, which reached only 13% in 2023. West Virginia's success in achieving greater female representation and apprenticeship was highlighted in a recent Apprenticeship for America state policy scan and described along that of South Carolina as far higher than other states. And female apprentices in West Virginia are disproportionately represented in healthcare and social assistance industry. As you can see in this figure, over 95% of apprentices in healthcare and social assistance are female. We believe that this is driven by the occupational composition of the apprenticeship industry, where childcare development specialist is the most common occupation. Now I'll hand it back to Melanie to talk about promising opportunities and areas for growth and apprenticeship expansion in the state.
Thanks, Marla. So in thinking about opportunities to strengthen and grow apprenticeship, we wanted to first start by looking at the occupations that are projected to add the most additional jobs in West Virginia over the next decade or so. And you can see that home health and personal care aides tops the list far and above all other occupations. But we do see a fairly wide range of occupations represented here, a number in healthcare, but some other sectors as well. This orange triangle reflects the occupations that pay a living wage. And the way we're defining that is using MIT's living wage calculator. These are occupations that pay enough that a single working adult could support themselves and one child. And so in West Virginia, that works out to be about $33 an hour in terms of pay. So you can see we've got 4 of our 10 occupations generating the most new jobs, meeting that living wage criterion. Next, we wanted to look at which of these quickly growing occupations are apprenticeable. Are they on the list of the Department of Labor occupations where apprenticeship preparation is an appropriate pathway? There may be other pathways into these occupations as well. This is highlighted in the blue bars that just came over your screen. And then finally, the gold stars that we're adding now reflect which occupations currently have apprenticeship programs in West Virginia, where there are existing programs. So the bars that are blue with an orange triangle and no gold star, represent opportunities to build out an apprenticeship pathway to a good paying career. And so in particular, I wanted to highlight industrial machinery mechanic towards the bottom here as one such opportunity. Commercial Metals Company has planned to build a new mill in West Virginia, and they've actually started advertising openings for an industrial mechanic apprenticeship program. So we may see infrastructure built out for this, and this may have a gold star in future iterations. It's important to consider the total number of jobs being added to an occupation. But again, we talked about how apprenticeship is in some ways an immediate pathway into the workforce because of that work-based learning component, because apprentices are immediately placed on job sites. And so apprenticeship could be particularly useful in fields where we see very rapid growth, where traditional training pathways may not be able to keep up. And so here we have the 11 occupations that are the fastest growing in West Virginia. It's 11 because there was a three-way tie for 9th place here. So we're going to use the same color and symbols as we did before. The orange triangle highlights which occupations pay that family-sustaining wage of $33 an hour. And again, this is specific to West Virginia wages, not national wages. You can see that 7 out of our 11 do meet those criteria. When we look at which ones are apprenticeable in blue, we can see that 7 out of the 11 are apprenticeable with a good amount of overlap with occupations that pay that family-sustaining wage. Unfortunately, only one of these occupations has a current apprenticeship in West Virginia, and that's home health and personal care aides, which does not pay a family-sustaining wage. So I want to highlight information security analysts up here in the 4th row as a potential growth area for the state. North Carolina and Maryland both have apprenticeship programs for this field that may be useful models for West Virginia to consider. There are also several areas of apprenticeship where West Virginia has been a national leader, and we wanted to ensure we highlight those as well. So first, the recently passed funding for the Skilled Trades Apprenticeship Non-Traditional Degree, or STAND program, is a really exciting combination of apprenticeship and traditional degree pathways that allows those who've obtained their journeyman credential, so they've completed a registered apprenticeship, to articulate that experience into up to 45 college credits, which puts them most of the way towards an associate degree. And so for an electrician who wants to take a couple courses, get a business degree to be able to start his or her own business, the state has built a ready pathway for that. And this is open to both current apprentices and those who previously completed their apprenticeship training. You also saw childcare show up a lot in the results that Marwa presented earlier as a big portion of the healthcare and social assistance sector. West Virginia has the country's longest running childcare apprenticeship program, and it's been in place since 1989. Finally, we wanted to highlight the state's embrace of non-traditional apprenticeship fields that may be part of what's driving that different industry composition that Marwa highlighted earlier. In most states, that sector map would have looked really different with construction topping all of the list, but West Virginia has been really conscientious about trying to embrace non-traditional fields. And that's likely due in part from the Apprenticeship in Motion effort that West Virginia has put forth with some funding from the Department of Labor to build out registered apprenticeships in some of these more non-traditional fields. We also wanted to highlight some challenges and considerations. We've done work on apprenticeship in other states, and many of the challenges that we've heard here are not unique to West Virginia. In particular, we've heard about the lack of sustainable funding mechanisms, some frustration with needing to follow federal and state changes in eligibility for funding. We've heard a need to improve employer buy-in, and this comes in two forms. First, from being able to navigate the regulatory aspects of a registered apprenticeship. That can be very challenging for employers, particularly when they're acting without intermediaries and if they're smaller employers. And second, understanding the potential return on investment and the forms that may take in terms of lower turnover, higher employee commitment, better alignment with training for your individual company. Also, echoing other states we've worked in, we've heard concerns about a lack of awareness of apprenticeship opportunities overall and a lack of awareness about the labor market value and experiential value that apprentices gain from completing their apprenticeship programs. And this is common among both young adults and their career advisors. So that could be parents, friends, teachers, coaches, those who are influencing career decisions. In addition to these common challenges that we've seen in pretty much every state we've worked with, West Virginia has some additional challenges, some of which go beyond challenges faced by other predominantly rural communities. We hear again and again about the topography of the state, the mountainous nature, the lack of public transportation, and how that can make moving to different locations very challenging. An apprenticeship, by its very nature, requires at least 2 locations, unless your required technical instruction is taking place at your job site. And in some fields, this can be even more extreme. As Marwa highlighted earlier, in construction, you're frequently moving from job site to job site, that can be even within the same week. And that can be quite challenging for those who do not have ready access to transportation. There's a couple of approaches we've seen in other work on rural apprenticeships and on workforce development more generally. Providing transportation services, whether that's a chartered shuttle bus or carpool for those that live within a certain community, or providing hub and spoke transportation from a central point, like where required technical instruction is taking place, to the job sites for apprentices. Other approaches involve providing financial support for taking a cab or renting a car. That can be fairly expensive to enact. And then also trying to minimize the number of sites that apprentices need to go to. And so one approach is to establish satellite campuses in more locations within the state to bring that required technical instruction closer to the apprentice. An alternative is using online options, which doesn't fully replace an in-person experience, but can broaden access to this very important pathway. As we close out the findings portion of the webinar today, I want to acknowledge those that have made this work possible. The partnership with West Virginia University, input from the governor's office and the state legislature, and then especially for our team, the conversations we've had with folks in state agencies, at the U.S. Department of Labor, and with apprenticeship sponsors have been invaluable in helping shape our understanding of what's happening on the ground with apprenticeship in West Virginia. We've really enjoyed getting to know you and hearing your passion for workforce development and improving economic mobility in the state. And so with that, we look forward to answering some of your questions. We'll get to as many as you can. You're always welcome to follow up with us via email. Put those in the chat earlier, and then they're also listed on the slide. All right, so let's see here. Looking through the questions that we have in both the chat and Q&A. First question, are there particular occupations or industries that we should expect to be not well captured in Rapids? Marwa, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question. Of course, there's a lot of missing data in both occupation and industry. We see that a lot more in occupation than industry. It's hard to, of course, figure out what occupations are missing if nothing is listed in there. But a lot of the difficulty in analyzing occupations, it comes from inconsistencies. So sometimes the same occupational title can show up in different ways, like different variations of the occupational title electrician. Now, Rapids has provided a crosswalk to occupational codes that can help improve that, but there are still some anomalies here and there that we are unable to figure out, easily where they would fit in. The other thing that I should mention about industry is we see a lot of because of the role that community colleges play in the apprenticeship system, and this is not specific to West Virginia, I should say this is just a Rapids issue overall and not limited to the state of West Virginia. A lot of those who take an apprenticeship where the community college is the sponsor, they may show up under educational services. Sometimes typically healthcare or construction type of job may show up under educational services because the sponsor's industry is educational services, given that it's a community college. So of course there's some cleaning that can be done, but that also leaves room for human error. So we're not entirely sure what the error rate is, and I'm not aware of a source where we can check the accuracy rate of the data.
Thanks, Marwa. Next question from the chat, and we'll flip over to the Q&A as well. Question about why the share of apprenticeships in the construction industry went down so dramatically from 2014 to 2015. Is that utilization? Is that shift in composition? What can you say about that? I can pull that graph back up.
Yeah, if you can pull that graph, that would be great. Yeah, I believe it's this one. We do see a decline from 53% to 32%. I want to caution that these are all relative percentages. So the growth in public administration in relative terms may be pushing down the number of construction, even if the utilization rate had remained stable. I don't have specific reasons as to why I believe construction went down and during that time period, but if others in the audience can point to either changes in the state or changes in legislation, that would be super helpful.
I saw a number of experts who we talked to as part of this project introducing themselves in the chat, so please do feel free to weigh in as well. All right, we have a question in the Q&A on how much of the labor force in West Virginia is currently earning that $33 an hour living wage. And while we don't have that exact statistic for you, I want to reflect back that this is definitely a goal. This is not a, this is something that is expected for every individual. There are many springboard careers where you can start out in a field, you may not be earning that living wage, but it leads to an occupation where you could achieve that living wage. So we highlight that in those ending slides as kind of a focal point of if we're going to build out existing apprenticeship infrastructure, what are the occupations where we can make the biggest case for apprentices in terms of what their labor market outcomes are. Again, with that eye towards helping retain population in the state, showing that there is a viable and economically sustainable future here. We have a question about whether we were able to talk with folks from the JATC apprenticeship training facilities for skilled construction trades, highlighting that there are more than a dozen skilled crafts in West Virginia with their own apprenticeship training programs and infrastructure with a tuition-free training model. That's absolutely fantastic. I don't believe they were one of the stakeholders that we spoke with, but if anybody is on the line from that, we would absolutely love to incorporate your perspective into this work. I have another question asking about the national programs, that national versus state distinction that you highlighted earlier, Marwa. Does this factor in the national programs that West Virginia has with many employers like Marshall Manufacturing, where the West Virginia program would be listed as Marshall Manufacturing and not the 50 employers? So it sounds like the employers are not the direct sponsor. It would be Marshall Manufacturing. And so it sounds like that location would not be West Virginia. So feel free to answer that, Marwa.
Yeah, to the extent that this beyond just Marshall Manufacturing, to the extent that the program itself is headquartered in West Virginia, it would show up in our analyses. And I should also mention that a lot of the sponsors in West Virginia and otherwise may not necessarily be the employers, like an intermediary, like a community college. And so we don't link to the location of the employer, but we link to the location of the apprenticeship program. And so to the extent that the program is headquartered in West Virginia, they will show up in our analyses. If they're headquartered somewhere else, they would not. And just to keep consistent throughout our analysis for West Virginia.
All right, keep the questions coming in the Q&A. We've got one more asking, what do we know about the outcomes of apprentices in West Virginia? What does this pathway look like in terms of what the apprentice ultimately is able to do?
Do you want me to take that one?
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, thanks. So we know that the majority are training in healthcare and social assistance, public administration, and construction, like we've talked about. These are the three largest apprenticeship industries in the state. We also know that about 63% of them complete their program and earn a nationally recognized credential. We don't know much beyond their completion. Apprentices are not tracked in Rapids after they finish their apprenticeship program. So we don't have concrete data about whether they're in the labor force after their completion, whether they're still in West Virginia, what occupations they're in, how much they make. But prior research in different states and on the national level shows that about 90% of apprentices are retained for employment after their completion of an apprenticeship program. And the average starting wage for apprenticeship or the average salary for apprenticeship completers is around $80,000 a year. Now, I speak for myself, and I think Melanie, we would love to dig into this specifically for West Virginia. We'd love to see or validate some of these hypotheses in terms of retaining folks in these training industries, what occupations they work in, what are their starting salaries or wages after they complete their apprenticeship program, and how that looks in the long term. We'd especially like to also see whether completers are more likely to stay in the state and mitigate some of that brain drain that takes place. But that's what we know about apprentices in West Virginia.
Thanks, Marla. I also have a question about what lessons West Virginia can learn from states that have seen rapid apprenticeship growth, noting that, of course, West Virginia is already near the top of states in the US for utilization.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, we should highlight that West Virginia has already seen a lot of growth in apprenticeship, and it's already one of the highest states in apprenticeship utilization around the country. But of course, there's always room for more growth, and you've identified some occupations that could be a great place, at least in the next 10 to 20 years, because they have a lot of projected employment growth. But in general, we think that improving employer buy-in is a crucial thing to achieve in meaningfully expanding apprenticeship in West Virginia and elsewhere. Outreach and showing employers returns on investment, data on how productive apprentices are, the retention rate of apprentices can really make a difference in bringing employers to the table and encouraging them to start their own apprenticeship programs and take on apprentices. Building partnership between community colleges and employers can also help scale up apprenticeship. This can harness some of the resources and training capabilities that are already in place. The community college does not have to start from scratch when it comes to related technical instruction. They already have the resources in place, but of course, having the employer on board is also important because you want them for the occupational training, but you would also want them to retain the apprentice down the line after the completion of their apprenticeship. And lastly, I should mention investments, tax incentives, sustainable funding sources are all important for not just growing apprenticeship opportunities and programs, but also to sustain that growth in the long term.
Makes perfect sense. Quick follow-up on one of your prior answers, that $80,000 apprenticeship completion wage, is that a West Virginia specific statistic? Is that all sectors, one particular sector? Can you tell us a little bit more about the context of that number?
Yeah, thanks. And thank you for the clarifying question. I should have mentioned this earlier. This is not West Virginia specific. This is from earlier studies that looked at a number of states across the US. And it's also not industry specific. It's an average across apprenticeship completers in different industries. Of course, keeping in mind that construction for the longest time has made up the biggest proportion of industries and apprenticeship in the US in the last decade or two. And so a lot of it is maybe driven by construction, and this is not West Virginia specific. We would love to calculate that statistic for West Virginia and for different industries within West Virginia, but we don't have that at the moment.
All right, and then we have another question asking about how apprenticeship could contribute to stability for existing mothers, families looking to get back into the workforce. So how is this as a re-entry pathway? And are we seeing any barriers like childcare access or gender religious biases?
Yeah, those are great questions. And Melanie, help me answer those questions if you'd like. We see apprenticeship as a pathway to the middle class. We see it as a pathway to long-term careers and not just a job. And so to the extent that it can help for stability for existing mothers and families, it's a great way to earn a credential and training and labor force relevant skills without incurring further debt to be able to join the labor force. In terms of what barriers or challenges we see, there are a host of challenges, and this is not specific to West Virginia. Again, over the board, we see a lot of challenges highlighted, for example, unavailability of childcare, transportation challenges. This just highlights the importance of having wraparound services that are specific to the apprenticeship programs in order to support apprentices, improve their perception of apprenticeship and convince them to take on an apprenticeship, but also to retain them throughout the apprenticeship program and get them all the way to the finish line so they can finish and complete their apprenticeship program. We are looking to conduct some more work to improve apprenticeship completion rates across the US. And so if you have more information or insights about barriers and challenges, we would love to hear from you. Melanie, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I love the thought about this as a pathway to reentering the workforce, especially with the labor force participation rate comments that I made at the outset. I do want to clarify that labor force participation rate being lower than what we see in the US is true for both men and women. This isn't strictly a, women in West Virginia aren't working issue. And some of this, by the way, the labor force participation rate does not take into account age in terms of the upper end. And so some of this may also be contributed to by that older age gradient. But in terms of pathways back into the workforce, I do think apprenticeship makes perfect sense. We do see a range of ages among apprentices, both in West Virginia and in our work nationally. We are just embarking on some additional work, trying to work with apprenticeship sponsors to understand the selection criteria they use. Many apprenticeship programs are oversubscribed. There are more people who want to join this program because they understand the value of it than there are training seats at that given time. And so we are hoping to better understand what those criteria are and how that might shape who is able to enter and complete an apprenticeship program. So more to come on that will hopefully shed some more insights there. Marwa, what was the most surprising finding from this work in terms of occupation or sector you didn't expect to see much apprenticeship utilization? What was something that struck you?
Yeah, I don't know if I don't know if this was surprising. I mean, we read about this in the Apprenticeship for America report. But the high female representation in apprenticeship, I thought, was really nice to see. And unlike what we see in the rest of the country, it's unique to West Virginia. And I thought that was, I don't know, pleasantly surprising. The other thing that we didn't get to talk about a lot is the activity that we see in educational services and specifically training of teachers in the state. There's an apprenticeship program for teachers. It's actually a youth apprenticeship program, and it's linked to Grow Your Own. And it targets high school juniors and seniors who are interested in teaching and maybe show signs of interest in becoming a teacher one day to take them on and help them become teachers down the line. West Virginia requires teachers to have a bachelor's degree, and so the apprenticeship program helps high school students get in the door, start thinking about what that looks like for them, start doing some of the training that they need to get to become teachers in the short term.
Great answer. Thanks. I
Mhm.
also found it surprising. We have a question if we have any statistics to share regarding wages in West Virginia. I'm not sure whether that's wages overall or wage outcomes for apprentices. I know, Marwa, we were discussing earlier that to our knowledge, there isn't public-facing work that shows what the wage outcomes of apprentices are, though I would not be surprised if our collaborators in the Office of Apprenticeship have looked at those statistics on their own internally. Those are data that we didn't have access to for this project, but hope to be able to look at that in future work. Is there anything you want to highlight about wages more generally in the state?
I just wanted to mention that while what we said is true for apprentices after they complete their apprenticeship, we know what apprentices' wages are while they're doing their own apprenticeship. And I should also say that the U.S. Department of Labor determines a wage progression schedule for all of these apprenticeship programs. And it's one of the factors that they look at when they register an apprenticeship program. And so to that extent, we have some information, but of course, we don't have information about them after they complete the apprenticeship program.
We have another question coming in about apprenticeship providers' frustration with changing federal requirements. And is there anything we can share about the lack of WIOA funding availability for these programs? I might add on to that if there's anything you'd like to say about Workforce Pell and apprenticeship alignment, feel free to add that to your answer as well.
Yeah, and frustrations with requirements for funding, or the instability in funding, or changing requirements and changing funding opportunities over time really presents a big challenge for a lot of apprenticeship programs. You can imagine that planning to have an apprenticeship program requires having some sort of a pot of money that is going to be there to help with financing apprentices training and their wages. And so instability in funding really threatens the stability of a lot of programs, and may even change the calculus for a lot of potential sponsors in terms of whether they want to have their own apprenticeship program or not. Melanie, you mentioned Workforce Pell. Workforce Pell is now part of the calculus for apprenticeship. I think there's a lot of discussions in the community about how to make it work for apprenticeship, specifically with a lot of the requirements that come with Pell, like the duration of the training and the outcomes that you need from the providers to be able to be eligible for Pell funding. And so, for example, there are restrictions on how long the program takes, but also there are restrictions on how well the apprenticeship provider or the training provider performs in terms of placing trainees in occupations, in their target occupations, and how much they'll make after their training. I think there's still a lot of that is up in the air, especially as there are restrictions on how long a program can be. Apprenticeship programs vary widely in how long they can take. Some of them are 1 year, others can take up to 5 to 6 years, depending on the target occupation and the structure of training. Some of them train throughout, others train at the beginning or at the end. And so there are a lot of things to be ironed out to make Pell work for apprenticeship, but it's still a promising opportunity. Melanie, did you want to add something to that?
I was just going to flag, I'll drop this in the chat. Apprenticeships for America, which does a lot of work with apprenticeship intermediaries, did provide some comments on Workforce Pell in alignment with apprenticeship. Mara, I think you touched on some of the themes from that really well, but for anyone who wants to dig into this a little bit more deeply, I'm dropping the link in the chat. And I also see that we had one attendee need to jump off to meet with someone regarding their non-traditional apprenticeship grant. So more evidence of West Virginia's leadership in broadening industries here. We have another question in the chat asking about experiences with various apprenticeship programs. Touch on which ones have been proven to be the most and least successful and what some of those factors are. I think there's probably not much we're going to be able to say about West Virginia specifically from this project, since we were more at the secondary data level for this. But Marwa, from your knowledge of the literature, are there implementation factors that are associated with better apprentice outcomes that you might be able to highlight?
Yeah, those are good questions. Yeah, and as you said, we're focused on secondary data for this project, so we won't be able to talk specifically about apprenticeship providers in West Virginia, but we see a lot in the literature about what makes for a good apprenticeship model. I think there's a lot of experimentation and innovation in trying to make apprenticeship models work for everyone, in trying to reach out to different folks who may be interested in apprenticeship. Part of the work is improving perceptions of apprenticeship. I think a lot of folks think of them as exclusively for construction. There may be a second option after college or university. And so doing some of the work to improve access and perceptions of apprenticeship is important. We've also seen some work in providing some wraparound services for apprentices to help them throughout the period of their program to get them to complete their program. So things like transportation vouchers or buses, things like childcare support in some ways. We were also seeing a lot in terms of the role of community colleges in apprenticeship and thinking about apprenticeship in this like stackable pathway towards other degrees. I think there's a lot of work throughout the nation that can help us get an idea of what's working and what's not. But I should also highlight that there's a lot of work to be done to rigorously evaluate some of these approaches to see what do they mean, where do they move the needle in terms of apprentices' outcomes. Do they improve their completion? Do they improve their retention? Do they lead to better placement opportunities down the line or employment retention after the completion of their apprenticeship?
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I love the mention of stackable credential pathways there. And it looks like this is another space in which West Virginia is really going to be a leader with the new STAND program. I saw we have a number of folks from community colleges on the line. And so if any of you are working to align your associate degree programs in light of that new STAND program to allow for that credit articulation from an apprenticeship into an associate's degree program, we would love to talk with you about your approach. This is a really fascinating model that really could prove very useful for other states too, if we're able to show positive outcomes in West Virginia, both in terms of who is now entering apprenticeship with this additional articulation ability, and then what this means for credential attainment in the state more broadly, and what those opportunities look like down the line. I think we're coming up on the top of the hour. So Marwa, I'll hand the mic back to you for any final closing comments, anything else you'd like to share with our audience about apprenticeship. And just want to, again, emphasize our thanks to the West Virginia community, all the stakeholders we've spoken with. It's been wonderful working in partnership with you. Marwa.
Thanks, Melanie. And again, thanks for our partners and collaborators. This has been a very insightful experience. And thank you all for taking the time to join us today. Please reach out to Melanie or myself if you'd like to talk some more. If you have any questions that we didn't get to today, I would love to talk to you and be on the lookout for more work from us. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Have a good afternoon, all.
All right. Bye-bye.